Forest mysteries. The first light of dawn struggled to pierce the thick, leaden clouds, casting a faint, spectral glow over the deserted station. Snow had settled overnight, blanketing the platform in icy silence, interrupted only by the faint, fading tracks that disappeared into the whiteness. A cold wind swept through the empty corridors, carrying a mournful, almost accusatory moan that seemed to seep into every crack of the aging structure. Inside, Thomas moved with deliberate caution, his boots crunching softly on the frost-hardened floor as he approached the small wooden desk near the grimy window. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the thermometer, the cold biting through his gloves, numbing his fingers. He pulled the fragile glass tube free, squinting at the mercury's reflection flickering in the dim light. The needle hovered dangerously low, much lower than expected. His brow furrowed beneath the thick fabric of his gloves as he adjusted his glasses and leaned in for a closer look. 25 below zero. The reading was alarming, even for this remote outpost. The temperature had been steadily dropping over the past weeks, but this sudden plunge defied the gradual trend. Thomas pressed his gloved fingers against his lips, then glanced back toward the window. Snowflakes drifted lazily, unperturbed by the sudden cold snap. Yet, this sharp descent felt unnatural, as if some unseen force was intensifying the freeze. He stepped away from the desk and moved toward the battered equipment lining the wall. Gauges, dials, all coated in frost, their mechanisms groaning softly under the strain of the cold. The radio, silent for days, emitted a faint static hum, a ghostly reminder of times when communication had been routine. Now it was useless, a relic of a bygone era. His hand, steady despite the chill, brushed through his graying hair and his brow tightened. Routine fatigue pressed heavily on him, but a growing sense of unease gnawed at his mind. The weather was turning colder, yes, but not so suddenly. Something was wrong. The air around him seemed to thicken, almost alive with a sinister presence that he couldn't explain. He reached again for the radio, pressing the unresponsive button. No signal, only static. The wind outside rattled the windows, stirring the snow into restless spirals. The silence inside grew oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old beams overhead. Deciding to investigate further, Thomas stepped outside, cautious and alert. His movements were deliberate, as if he sensed unseen eyes watching him. The snow-covered landscape stretched endlessly, broken only by jagged ice formations and the distant silhouette of mountains shrouded in mist. He paused, scanning the horizon, when a faint flicker caught his eye, irregular shadows darting across the snow. They seemed to dance just beyond his line of sight, shifting with the wind, but somehow unnatural. Not simply the play of light and shadow, but something more deliberate. His breath fogged in the frigid air as he squinted, trying to interpret what he saw. A sudden gust of wind carried a faint metallic scent that made his nostrils flare. He stiffened, instinctively clutching his coat tighter. His gaze sharpened, and he moved toward the edge of the station, eyes fixed on the snowfield. The shadows flickered again, more distinctly, elongated, jerking shapes that moved with an unnatural, almost mechanical rhythm. His pulse quickened, but he kept his face impassive. The shapes could be optical illusions or tricks played by exhaustion and solitude. Still, a prickling sensation crept up his spine. Something was wrong. Something was lurking just beyond the visible. He looked down at the snow near his boots. Small, irregular impressions marred the surface, scratches, perhaps, or the remnants of something dragged across the ice. He crouched, brushing aside a thin layer of snow with gloved fingers. The marks were fresh, inconsistent with the footprints he knew well. They looked hurried, uneven, as if something had recently passed through here. A faint growl broke the silence. Thomas froze, his grip tightening on his rifle. From the corner of his eye, he glimpsed a flash of movement, a quick, low blur of gray fur vanishing behind a mound of snow. His heart hammered as a surge of alertness sharpened his senses. He raised his gaze, scanning the terrain again, searching for the source. Nothing appeared at first, just swirling snow and distant shadows. Then, a dark form emerged from behind a cluster of icy rocks. It was too large for a fox or a hare, yet too small and swift for a bear. His mind hesitated, trying to classify what he saw, an animal or something else entirely. He hesitated, weighing his options. Approaching might scare it away, but staying put felt just as risky. The cold seeped through his layers, numbing his extremities, sharpening his awareness. Every sound, every flicker of movement heightened his alertness. Suddenly, a guttural growl shattered the quiet, a warning that sent a shiver through him. The shadow stepped into view, vague and dark, yet undeniably alive. Its form was hunched, ears pointed, eyes gleaming with a strange, unnatural light. The creature's presence seemed almost deliberate, as if it had been waiting for him. His instincts urged retreat, but he found himself rooted, staring. The creature's gaze was piercing, unsettling. He raised his hands slowly, palms open, trying to signal he meant no harm. The beast responded with a cautious, almost curious tilt of its head, then slowly melted back into the shadows, disappearing behind the rocks. The wind howled louder now, whipping snow into a frenzy. The flickering shadows on the snow seemed to dance, twisting into shapes that made his stomach tighten. He knew he should leave. Something about that creature's gaze unsettled him profoundly. Yet, a strange compulsion kept him watching, as if the creature's presence had unlocked a deeper awareness of the landscape's secrets. Turning back toward the station, Thomas felt a lingering chill, not only from the cold but from the encounter. The strange shadows, the sudden drop in temperature, the unseen watcher. These signs pointed to something beyond mere weather anomalies. Something was awakening in the frozen wilderness, lurking just beyond the edge of perception. Inside, the instruments registered the continued plunge of the thermometer, confirming the abnormal cold. Outside, the shadows flickered faintly, like dying flames in the snow. The storm was gathering strength, and an oppressive silence had settled over the landscape. Yet, beneath that quiet, a new understanding was forming, one that would change everything. Thomas's gaze lingered on the dark silhouette behind the rocks, a silent sentinel in the snow. His mind raced, realizing that this encounter was only the beginning. The cold was more than a weather pattern. It was a sign. Something ancient and unseen was stirring beneath the icy surface, and he had just glimpsed its first subtle movements. Night had fallen completely over the station, cloaking the icy landscape in darkness. A faint, intermittent flicker from a dying lantern cast shifting shadows across the cracked wooden walls. Outside, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant groan of ice cracking and the whisper of wind sweeping over the snowdrifts. Thomas stood motionless by the window, his gaze fixed on the bleak horizon beyond the glass, where faint shapes flickered at the edge of his vision, shadows that seemed to ripple and stretch, elusive yet persistent. A subtle movement caught his eye, a faint, almost imperceptible shift across the vast expanse of frozen surface. Through the grime-streaked glass, he saw them, irregular forms, barely distinguishable against the snow, gliding slowly and silently. They moved with an unnatural grace, twisting the stillness into a tense, almost surreal tableau. His breath fogged the window, and he pressed his palm against the cold surface, leaning closer for a better look. A shiver ran through him, not solely from the biting cold, but from a growing sense of unease. The shapes didn't resemble any familiar creature or human figure. They lacked the fluidity of life, appearing instead as fleeting silhouettes, ghostly echoes of motion caught in the corner of his eye. He blinked rapidly, trying to dispel the illusion, but the forms persisted, shifting subtly, as if aware of his gaze. Instinctively, Thomas reached for his coat, fingers trembling as he grasped the stiff fabric. The flickering lantern cast uneven pools of light, distorting the shadows that stretched and warped across the interior. He grabbed his flashlight from the shelf, the cold metal feeling heavy in his hand, and moved cautiously toward the door. Every step was deliberate, muffled by the thick snow that had accumulated at the threshold. Stepping outside, the icy air immediately assaulted him, slicing through the fabric of his coat and seeping into his bones. The crunch of snow underfoot echoed sharply in the stillness, each step heightening his awareness. The snow was mostly undisturbed, save for faint impressions, trails recently carved into the white surface. Thomas knelt, eyes narrowing as he examined the faint grooves. The tracks were irregular, inconsistent with the paws of any known animal. Some appeared broader, almost dragging, while others were sharp and precise, as if something had been slid or dragged across the ice. The trail led away from the station, winding toward the darker, more forbidding expanse beyond his flashlight's reach. His pulse quickened, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension tightening his chest. He rose slowly, scanning the area for additional signs. The silence pressed down like a weight, broken only by the distant crack of shifting ice. His gaze flickered between the trail and the horizon, where shadows deepened, swallowing the faint outlines of the landscape. No signs of life stirred. No sounds betrayed any presence. Yet, the trail beckoned, compelling him to follow. He moved along the tracks carefully, each step crunching softly in the snow. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him, making each movement feel heavier. His exposed skin prickled with cold, and a gust of wind carried a faint whisper, almost like distant voices echoing from a world slipping further into darkness. His grip on the flashlight tightened, knuckles widening. As he advanced, the trail seemed to grow fresher, snow around the footprints disturbed, as if recently made. The marks appeared deliberate, beckoning him deeper into the wilderness. He hesitated briefly, then pressed forward, the beam of his flashlight sweeping ahead into the darkness. The landscape remained silent, empty, and unyielding. Suddenly, a faint scraping noise made him freeze. It was subtle, like claws dragging across ice. His heart pounded, and he spun around, eyes darting into the shadows. The darkness held still, yet the sensation of being watched intensified. He gripped his flashlight more tightly, feeling the cold metal bite into his palm. Every nerve was alert. Out of the corner of his eye, movement flickered, more distinct now. A quick shadow crossing behind a cluster of snowdrifts. His instincts urged him to stay still, to listen, to observe. The shapes he'd glimpsed earlier seemed to hover at the edge of perception, slipping just beyond clear sight. Was it a trick of the light, his imagination, or something tangible, something dangerous? He took a cautious step forward, snow crunching beneath his boot. The trail veered slightly right, toward a narrow depression where the ice was thinner, darker, more ominous. He hesitated, torn between curiosity and the instinct to retreat. Yet, something about the trail compelled him. An unspoken message, a silent summons to follow further into the unknown. A sudden gust of wind swept across the ice, scattering loose snow into the air and briefly obscuring his view. When the whiteness settled, he saw it, something small and moving just beyond the edge of the light. A faint flicker of fur or feather, or perhaps a fleeting shadow cast by the moonlight on a creature too swift to identify. His breath fogged again as he stood frozen, eyes fixed on the spot. The trail stretched ahead, leading into the darkness, into the heart of the cold, relentless wilderness. Whatever had made these marks had vanished into the night, leaving only faint traces of its passage. Yet a deeper sense of vulnerability crept over him, sharper than the cold. He realized that whatever lurked out there was not merely an animal or natural phenomenon. Something else, something unseen, was moving beneath the surface of the ice and snow, leaving signs of its presence. His mind raced with questions, but only one truth remained clear. The night had become far more mysterious, and the shadows had begun to conceal secrets that might never be uncovered. A new understanding settled within him. This was no longer just an investigation of tracks or shapes. It was a confrontation with the unknown, and he was now part of it. Turning back toward the station, Thomas's steps were hesitant but resolute. The trail, faint but persistent, beckoned him to follow it deeper into the darkness. He knew that whatever awaited him beyond the horizon might change everything about the landscape, about himself, or about what lurked beneath the ice. As he moved away from the faint glow of the station, the shadows seemed to ripple and shift, as if watching him leave, waiting for the right moment to reveal what they concealed. Thomas paused at the crest of the snow-laden ridge, his breath forming fleeting clouds in the icy air. The oppressive darkness pressed in from all directions, pierced only by the faint shimmer of distant stars obscured behind thick, rolling clouds. His eyes scanned the faint trail ahead, scattered, uneven footprints leading away from the station, then abruptly vanishing into a patch of disturbed snow. A dark smear marred the pristine white surface, sticky and wet against the cold, suggesting recent violence. His pulse quickened, and he hesitated, torn between following the trail or retreating to the safety of the station's shelter. A gust of wind swept over the ridge, carrying a faint, mournful howl that seemed to rise from the depths of the icy abyss. The sound was distant but unmistakable, a reminder of the wilderness's relentless, uncaring nature. Every nerve in Thomas's body tensed as he listened, his grip tightening on his coat. The storm was intensifying, and the shadows seemed to shift with each gust, heightening his sense of vulnerability. He moved cautiously, kneeling beside the blood-stained patch. The snow was soaked, glistening with crimson streaks that starkly contrasted with the white. As he lowered himself, his flashlight's beam caught a flicker of movement, a small, trembling figure caught in the pale glow. It was a creature sprawled on its side, shivering violently. Its fur was matted with ice, blood, and torn flesh, chunks of tissue missing, exposing raw, bleeding patches beneath. The pup's eyes, wide and glistening, locked onto him with a mixture of terror and helplessness. It whimpered softly, a fragile sound that cut through the silence, echoing the fragile boundary between life and death. Thomas's hand hovered uncertainly before reaching out. His fingers brushed the icy fur, trembling as he gently pressed them into the creature's side. The pup flinched at first, a shiver running through its tiny frame, but gradually it relaxed under his touch. The warmth of his palm contrasted sharply with the frigid air, and a surge of conflicting emotions flooded him. Dread, empathy, a desperate urge to save. He knew he should leave it be, call for help, or wait for dawn, but something in the creature's trembling body compelled him to act. He carefully scooped the injured animal into his arms, mindful of the deep gash along its side. Its fragile form felt almost weightless, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility settled over him. The pup whimpered again, softer this time, leaning into his chest as if seeking reassurance. His gloved fingers brushed away some of the blood-matted fur, revealing the wound, a jagged tear, possibly inflicted by a predator or a sharp claw during a scuffle with the wilds. The faint scent of blood mingled with the cold air, heightening his urgency. Suddenly, a sharper gust of wind tore across the ridge, carrying a distant, haunting howl that seemed to echo from the shadows beyond. The sound was distant but piercing, a stark reminder that the wilderness was alive with unseen threats. Thomas froze, instinctively clutching the trembling pup tighter. The wind's cry repeated, more insistent, sending a shiver down his spine. The howling seemed to call out to something, perhaps a predator or a pack lurking in the darkness. He cast a wary glance around, scanning the bleak landscape for signs of movement or danger. The trail ahead remained silent, but the distant howling persisted, now joined by softer echoes that danced on the wind. The environment was alive with unseen perils, and his mind raced with questions. Should he risk returning to the station with the fragile creature, exposing both himself and the pup to whatever lurked outside? Or should he leave it here, trusting that nature would take its course? A flicker of resolve ignited within him. He couldn't abandon the pup, not after witnessing its helplessness. The worsening storm outside made shelter imperative. Carefully, he adjusted his grip, supporting the trembling body against his chest. His coat was thick, but he knew it offered little protection against the biting cold if he lingered. Still, the sense of responsibility grew stronger. This tiny life depended entirely on him now. As he turned to head back toward the station, the distant howling grew louder, more insistent. The wind carried it across the icy expanse, a mournful chorus that seemed to pierce into his very soul. Every step felt heavier, burdened not only by the weight of the pup, but also by the mounting doubts in his mind. Was he risking everything by bringing the injured creature inside? Could he truly save it? Or was this act of compassion a reckless mistake? He pressed forward, eyes fixed on the faint glow of the station's outline through the swirling snow. The terrain was treacherous, the snow soft and unstable beneath his boots, threatening to swallow him at any moment. The howling behind him persisted, a chilling reminder that he was no longer alone in this frozen wilderness. Inside the station, the dim interior offered a fragile warmth, a sanctuary from the relentless cold. Thomas stepped cautiously, the injured pup cradled against his chest. His mind churned with conflicting thoughts, fear of what might be lurking outside, concern for the creature's survival, and a flicker of hope that, despite the darkness, some light remained. He knew the night was far from over, and the choices he made now could alter everything. He gently set the pup down on the cold floor, its trembling body pressing against the rough surface. As he took a deep breath, the distant howls faded into a haunting lull. The storm's roar still echoed in his ears, mirroring the tumult inside him. Uncertainty, compassion, and a flickering resolve. This act of kindness had shifted his understanding. He was no longer merely an observer of the wilderness's cruelty, but now a participant in its fragile balance. Looking down at the injured creature, he realized that his knowledge had expanded. He understood the dangers lurking outside, but also the possibility of hope. The pup's survival depended on him, and in this moment, he recognized that his decision to help had created a new bond, one that might change his fate in the course of his mission. He knelt beside the pup, wrapping his coat around it for warmth. The howling outside continued, but now it sounded less like a threat and more like a call, an echo of the wilderness's unyielding, indifferent voice. Thomas's grip tightened on the creature, his mind clear. He would protect it no matter what. The darkness still loomed, but inside, a faint spark of purpose ignited, illuminating a path forward through the icy night. The flickering glow of the small oil lamp cast uneven shadows across the cramped room, its faint light flickering against the rough wooden walls cracked and scarred by time. Outside, the wind's mournful wail pierced the night, whipping through the gaps and rattling the windows. But inside, a fragile silence lingered, broken only by the soft whimpering from the corner where Thomas hunched over the injured pup. His hands, rough and trembling, carefully wiped away the blood-streaked fur, trying to steady himself as much as the tiny creature beneath his fingertips. The pup was no more than a few months old, with matted coat and a deep gash on its side that seeped crimson onto the snow-white fur. Thomas's brow furrowed as he examined the wound, searching for something to stem the bleeding. His supplies were minimal: tattered cloth, a rusty needle, and a battered tin of antiseptic that had long since lost its strength. No proper medical kit existed here. Only remnants scavenged from the abandoned station. A sudden gust rattled the door latch, making him flinch, but he forced himself to focus on the task. Carefully, he pressed the cloth against the wound, applying gentle pressure to slow the bleeding. The pup whimpered again, trembling in his grasp, its eyes half-lidded but still alert. Thomas's jaw tightened. He knew he couldn't leave it exposed to the cold and the storm outside, not when the wind threatened to tear the fragile shelter apart. He reached for the antiseptic, pouring a small amount onto the cloth, then dabbed at the gash with cautious precision. The sharp scent of burnt oil and bitter antiseptic filled the cramped space, mingling with the dampness that clung to the walls and floor. The pup's trembling slowed, and its breathing steadied slightly. Thomas silently prayed for its survival, feeling the weight of responsibility pressed down on him. It was vulnerable, fragile, nothing like the fierce predator he imagined it would become. Yet in that moment, offering aid was all he could do. As he worked, his mind drifted to the outside world. The shifting shadows cast by the storm, the distant cracks echoing through the ice, and the relentless howl of the wind. No rescue was imminent. The storm's fury had sealed him in, and the darkness outside was closing in. His solitude pressed against him like the icy walls surrounding the station. He knew that leaving the pup outside was unthinkable, but hiding it inside meant risking exposure. The fragile shelter could not withstand the storm forever, and if anyone discovered the creature, it could mean danger, possibly death. He looked around the small room, weighing his options. The decision crystallized in his mind. He would conceal the pup, keep it hidden until he could find a safer place or a way to escape. Revealing it now would be reckless, an invitation for trouble. He wrapped a rough but clean scrap of cloth around the creature, tucking it in carefully. The pup's amber eyes fluttered open briefly, piercing through the gloom, a flicker of resilience shining through. Thomas hesitated, then gently brushed his fingers along the damp fur. The tiny body twitched faintly, a sign of life and stubborn will. For a moment, a strange warmth stirred within him. Hope, perhaps, that the creature might survive. But reality quickly reasserted itself. He could not keep the pup hidden forever. The station's doors, fragile as they were, might not hold against the storm's fury or the curiosity of outsiders. Someone could arrive, or the weather could worsen, exposing his secret. His gaze shifted to the small, wrapped form, and he felt the weight of his choices. The risks of discovery loomed large, yet abandoning the pup outside was unthinkable. The storm outside was relentless, and the cold seeped into his bones. But inside this cramped refuge, a fragile thread of resolve was weaving itself. He would keep the creature concealed, at least for now. Night deepened, the wind's shriek rising and falling like a mournful song. Thomas settled back, eyes fixed on the pup, feeling an odd sense of connection grow in the dim glow of the lamp. For the first time in days, a spark of purpose ignited within him, stronger than the fear that had clouded his thoughts. He understood that this secret could not stay hidden forever, but for now, it was enough to keep it safe. Exhaustion crept through his limbs, and he allowed himself a brief moment of respite. Watching the tiny chest rise and fall, he felt a strange sense of hope, an ember flickering in the darkness. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to human struggles, but inside, a fragile thread of resolve had been spun. It might hold through the cold and chaos, at least for a little while longer. Suddenly, a faint sound outside, the muffled scrape of footsteps or the shifting of snow, made him tense. His eyes darted toward the door, heart pounding. Was it a visitor? Or perhaps the storm had finally broken enough to reveal his hiding place. He stiffened, listening intently, but the noise faded into the wind's wail. He exhaled slowly, realizing it was just the storm's cruel symphony. He reached into his pocket and retrieved a small, battered piece of wood, placing it behind the door latch to reinforce it. The storm might still threaten to breach their fragile refuge, but he would not give up. He had made his choice to hide, to protect what little he could, and to face whatever came next. As the night stretched on, Thomas's gaze remained on the pup, whose faint heartbeat and gentle breathing offered a silent reassurance. The storm's fury outside persisted, but inside this tiny room, a new resolve had taken root. He understood that his knowledge of the creature's existence was a secret that could change everything, either saving him or condemning him. For now, he would guard it, and with that, a new chapter of his solitary struggle began. By dawn, the storm's roar would weaken, and with it, the fragile hope that had blossomed in the darkness. Thomas's situation had shifted. He was no longer just a survivor hiding from the cold and the storm. He now carried a secret that could forge new alliances or ignite new enemies. The stakes had risen, and the path ahead remained uncertain, but he was no longer entirely alone. The first light of dawn struggled against a thick, swirling curtain of snow and wind, the tempest outside having grown fiercer overnight. The landscape was a shifting maze of white chaos, blinding and relentless. Outside the station's windows, ice crystals pressed against the glass like frozen fingers, trying to seep inside as the gusts battered the structure. Visibility had shrunk to a few yards, the world outside reduced to an indistinct blur of gray and white, as if the storm itself sought to erase all traces of life. Thomas stood motionless at the window, eyes fixed on the raging storm. His breath fogged the glass as he pressed his palm against it, watching the snow spiral in dizzying, unpredictable patterns. The cold had seeped through his worn coat, biting into his skin, but his focus remained unshaken. This was no ordinary winter storm. The way it had arrived so suddenly, unleashing chaos overnight, suggested something unnatural, perhaps a force beyond mere weather. His fingers tapped faintly against the glass, seeking reassurance in the swirling darkness outside. Suddenly, a violent gust rattled the building, causing the lights to flicker and the walls to shudder. The station's radio emitted a burst of static before falling silent. Thomas clenched his jaw, recognizing that the communication line was now dead. No voice, No signal, only the howling wind and the relentless snow. His mind raced through possibilities. Would the storm persist for days? Could rescue arrive before supplies ran out? The questions gnawed at him, filling the silence with a growing sense of dread. A faint crackling sound emerged from the station speakers, weak and trembling. Thomas's heart jumped as he recognized Elena's voice, strained but clear. "Thomas, do you copy? The storm's worsening. Visibility's almost zero. We're cut off here. You need to prepare. Stay inside, keep warm. If this keeps up, we might be trapped for a while." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. Elena's tone was calm, but carried an undercurrent of anxiety that made his stomach tighten. A faint crackling sound emerged from the station speakers, weak and trembling. Thomas's heart jumped as he recognized Elena's voice, strained but clear. "Thomas, do you copy? The storm's worsening. Visibility's almost zero. We're cut off here. You need to prepare. Stay inside, keep warm. If this keeps up, we might be trapped for a while." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. Elena's tone was calm, but carried an undercurrent of anxiety that made his stomach tighten. She was trying to sound reassuring, but her voice betrayed her concern. The station's isolation felt more tangible than ever. No way to send help now. No way to warn anyone if something else lurked beyond the storm's fury. His gaze flicked to the snow-covered window again, imagining the outside as a swirling, merciless maw ready to swallow everything whole. He moved toward the door, his boots crunching softly on the icy floor. The storm's roar grew louder as he grasped the handle, hesitating for a moment. The wind's scream seemed to pierce his mind, pressing against every nerve. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open a crack, peering into the blizzard. The world was a chaotic swirl of white and gray, shapes shifting unpredictably in the storm's grip. Snow whipped past in sharp, stinging gusts, obliterating any sense of distance or direction. Inside, he hurriedly secured the door, shoving heavy furniture against it and layering blankets over the gaps. The interior was cloaked in shadows, the faint glow of a battered lantern casting flickering shapes across the walls. The wind's fury seeped through the tiniest cracks, making the space feel colder and more oppressive. Thomas moved to the central table, clutching the lantern and its fragile flame, which cast long, wavering shadows. The room's silence was oppressive, like a tomb, as the storm's violence pressed inward. He wrapped himself tightly in a thick blanket, clutching it to his chest. His hands trembled, not from cold alone, but from the mounting anxiety. A faint hope flickered. Elena's warning might be the last contact he'd have for a while. Yet beneath that hope lurked a darker fear. The storm might last for days, or worse, something else might be lurking beyond the chaos, waiting to strike when least expected. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the building, sharp and unnatural amid the storm's howling. His heart skipped a beat. Was it the wind snapping a beam? Or was it something else, something more sinister? He strained his ears, trying to identify the sound. Silence returned, heavy and complete, as if the station itself was holding its breath. The radio crackled again, faint and distorted. Thomas leaned in, desperate for any message. But only static responded, like whispers lost in the storm's roar. The silence that followed felt oppressive, worse than the noise. The fury outside persisted, relentless and unyielding. He checked the clock, though time was meaningless in this chaos. Minutes? Hours? It was impossible to tell. Outside, the snow continued to pile against the walls, threatening to bury the station entirely. Inside, the cold seeped into his bones, each breath shallow and hurried. He clenched his fists, fighting the rising panic. A sudden gust tore through a loose patch of the roof, whistling sharply before settling into a haunting drone. The structure groaned under the assault, the walls trembling as if they might give way. Thomas's eyes darted around, searching for signs of damage, for any weakness. Every creak sounded like a threat. Every gust was an assault on his resolve. He considered reinforcing the walls, but knew the storm's strength was beyond his control. His mind raced to find a way to withstand the onslaught. Then a distant, eerie cracking sound echoed through the building, a slow, deliberate noise that didn't match the storm's chaos. His stomach clenched. Was the station shifting under the pressure, or was something else, something unseen, causing the structure to strain? He froze, listening intently. Silence returned, thick and suffocating, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The radio sputtered again, faint and broken. Thomas pressed his ear to the receiver, trying to catch a message, any sign of life beyond the static. But only white noise responded, ghostly whispers of voices lost in the storm. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on him. He looked at the clock, though it was meaningless. Minutes? Hours? The storm's grip seemed eternal. Outside, the snow continued to pile, threatening to engulf everything. Inside, the cold seeped into his bones, each breath shallow and hurried. Suddenly, a loud tearing sound split the air. A section of the roof was ripped open by the wind, sending a rush of icy air inside. Thomas instinctively stepped back, his eyes wide as the cold flooded the room. He grabbed a thick cloth, pressing it against the jagged opening, trying to block the wind. The storm outside seemed alive, a beast feeding on the station's fragility. His gaze fell on the flickering lantern. The fragile flame cast flickering shadows that danced across the walls, but it was barely enough to dispel the darkness. A wave of helplessness washed over him. No matter how much he prepared, the storm's power was beyond his control. His fists clenched tighter, fighting the rising tide of panic. Then, faintly, he heard it, a subtle, unnatural cracking, like the sound of the building straining under pressure. His heart hammered in his chest. Was it the structure giving way, or something else? He strained to listen, but the sound faded, replaced by oppressive silence. The radio sputtered again, static filling the room. Thomas leaned closer, desperation mounting, but all he caught was a ghostly whisper of broken signals. The storm raged on, deafening and unrelenting. He glanced at the clock once more. Minutes? Hours? Time was meaningless here. Outside, snow continued to pile, threatening to crush the station. Inside, the cold seeped into his bones, each breath a struggle. A sudden gust tore through a loose corner of the roof, whistling sharply before settling into a haunting drone. Thomas's jaw clenched tighter. This was no ordinary storm. It was a relentless force designed to test every part of the station. And his mind sharpened with a singular focus: survival. To endure until help arrived or the storm subsided, no matter how long that took. As the howling persisted, he realized that the station was more than just shelter. It was a fragile fortress against the unknown. And within this white chaos, his resolve was the only thing standing between him and complete annihilation. The outside world was swallowed in chaos, but here, within these battered walls, a fragile hope persisted. The storm showed no signs of waning, yet Thomas sensed that this was only the beginning. The true challenge lay ahead, something darker, something waiting beyond the storm's fury. He tightened his grip on the lantern, steeling himself for whatever came next, knowing that his survival depended not just on endurance, but on unwavering resolve. The White Tempest was only the first act. The real test was yet to come. The howling wind battered the station, a relentless shriek that seemed to seep through every crack, carrying icy gusts that cut to the bone. Inside, the dimly lit room felt suffocating, shadows flickering across battered walls as the storm outside intensified. The flickering of the dying generator cast brief flashes of light, plunging Thomas into moments of darkness before sparks of illumination revealed the chaos within the small outpost. He moved swiftly, his breath fogging in the freezing air as he approached the control panel. His fingers trembled, not just from fatigue, but from a gnawing dread that had taken root over the past hours. The hum of the generator sputtered, then faltered, finally dying with a sharp metallic click. Darkness engulfed the room, broken only by the weak glow of a lantern he managed to keep burning, its flickering flame casting unsettling shadows. Thomas pressed his palms against the cold metal of the console, listening to the oppressive silence. The power was gone. Without electricity, the station felt more fragile, vulnerable to the relentless cold that seeped through the walls like an invisible predator. His eyes darted to the windows, where snow whipped in a furious swirl, blurring any hope of seeing beyond the glass. Outside, shadows danced against the whiteness, twisted shapes flickering and shifting with the wind's fury. A shiver ran down his spine, but he forced himself to focus. The station's survival depended on restoring some form of power, even if it was only a flicker of hope. His gaze settled on the battered backup batteries, an uncertain, fragile reserve that might provide just enough energy to run his sentry. He looked around desperately, searching for anything that could help. A battered radio sat silent on a shelf, its wires twisted and useless after years of disuse. The hope of hearing a distress signal or a rescue was shattered. The silence pressed in, oppressive and absolute, broken only by the distant ice cracking and the wind's banshee wails. Was anyone out there? Could anyone hear his silent plea buried beneath the storm's fury? His mind raced with doubts. The station was isolated, trapped in a prison of snow and ice. No other humans had been seen or heard from in days. Venturing outside was a terrifying prospect, yet deep down he wondered if it was the only way to find salvation. Somewhere beyond the swirling white chaos, perhaps someone was fighting to reach him, or perhaps not. A sudden gust slammed into the walls, rattling the windows violently. Shadows stretched and elongated across the frost-covered glass, moving unnaturally in a half-light. The darkness pressed inward, thick and suffocating, filling every corner of the room. Thomas's grip tightened on a rusted wrench he kept nearby, not out of hope, but out of instinct. He hesitated, ears straining for any sound above the storm's roar. Was that a faint crack, or just the wind? The noise was indistinct, blending into the cacophony outside. His thoughts flickered to the other station, miles away, unreachable now. No communication, no sign of rescue. Only the brutal winter and shadows lurking beyond the glass. He considered risking the storm to seek help, but the idea was reckless. The tempest was a living, breathing beast, unpredictable and deadly, and he was ill-prepared for such an ordeal. The thought of stepping outside into the swirling snow, crawling through the biting cold, searching for a signal or a way out, made his stomach churn. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put. His gaze drifted back to the flickering lantern, its weak flames struggling against the darkness. The light cast wavering shadows, making the room seem alive with silent, watching figures. The flicker was relentless, threatening to snuff out the fragile glow at any moment. He knew he couldn't remain in this oppressive gloom forever, but the idea of venturing into the chaos outside filled him with dread. He closed his eyes briefly, the cold and fatigue weighing heavily on his mind. The winds howling softened slightly, offering a fleeting moment of calm. Was this the lull before something worse, or a sign that the storm was beginning to subside? He dared not hope too loudly, knowing how fragile such thoughts were in this place. Then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, the wind's roar diminished. The violent shriek of the storm softened into a low moan. A strange stillness crept in, like the calm after a fierce battle. Shadows still flickered at the edges of his vision, but the tempest's oppressive grip was loosening, if only slightly. Could this be a sign, or merely a temporary respite before chaos resumed? His heart beat faster, a cautious flicker of optimism igniting within him. The storm's retreat might mean help was closer than he dare believe, or it could be the eye of a larger, more destructive fury. Either way, the brief pause offered a sliver of possibility. He clenched his fists, feeling the cold bite into his skin, yet a faint ember of resolve sparked anew. He knew he couldn't afford to remain paralyzed by fear. If there was any chance, no matter how slim, he had to act. Maybe the shadows outside were less threatening now, or perhaps they were merely waiting for the storm to pass completely. He cast a glance at the door, weighing whether to risk another step into the unknown or to stay hidden until the tempest's fury was gone. The air grew colder, the silence stretching longer. The lantern's flame steadied briefly, casting a steady glow that seemed to push back the darkness. Inside, Thomas felt the weight of solitude pressing down harder than ever. Yet amid the bleakness, a faint thought took root. Help might still be out there, hidden behind the snow and shadows, waiting for him to find it, if he dared. As the last gust of wind died away, a quiet clarity settled over him. Shadows were no longer just threats. They could be signs of movement, of life beyond the storm. The question now was, would he summon the courage to face the icy unknown once more, or succumb to despair? He inhaled deeply, feeling the cold fill his lungs, and steadied himself. Outside, the world remained cloaked in darkness, but the storm was waning. A new choice lay ahead, one that might alter everything. The flickering lantern cast a faint, trembling light on his face, a fragile symbol of hope amid the encroaching night. Suddenly, a faint shift in the wind's pattern caught his attention. The storm's roar, though subdued, hinted at something unpredictable lurking just beyond sight, an unseen force that might bring either salvation or catastrophe. His eyes narrowed as he listened, realizing that the storm's weakening was not a sign of peace, but a prelude to something more dangerous. He moved cautiously toward the door, gripping the handle tightly. The shadows outside seemed to pulse, waiting. He hesitated, then took a slow breath, preparing himself for whatever lay ahead, whether to step into the snow or to wait in silence. He knew that the next move could change everything, either leading to rescue or sealing his fate. The cold air pressed against his face as he pushed the door open slightly, the wind's icy fingers brushing past him. The storm's diminished howling created a fragile window of opportunity. With every ounce of resolve, Thomas stepped outside, ready to face the darkness, aware that the shadows might be more than mere threats, and that the storm's true nature was only beginning to reveal itself. Morning dawned with a subdued glow, casting a pale, cold light over the frozen expanse. The storm had finally subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the faint crackle of ice shifting and the distant cry of a solitary bird. Thomas stood at the edge of the station, muscles stiff from the night's struggle, eyes fixed on the bleak horizon. The wind had died down, but a sharp, penetrating chill lingered, seeping through his coat and prickling his skin like icy needles. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the frigid air sharpening his senses. His gaze drifted to the snow drifts, which had been reshaped overnight by the storm's fury. The smooth surface now resembled a patchwork quilt of upheaved layers, with high drifts pressed against the station walls. Yet, amidst this chaos, something unusual caught his eye, a pattern in the snow that hadn't been there the evening before. Initially, he dismissed it as a trick of light or a random sculpting by the wind. But as he squinted, the details sharpened. Large, uneven footprints pressed into the packed snow, leading away from the station toward the frozen lake. The impressions were unmistakably paw-shaped, broad, with deep indentations that suggested a creature of significant size had passed through recently. A flicker of curiosity ignited within him, tempered by a cautious awareness. The trail was fresh, probably no more than a few hours old, and the tracks showed signs of hurried movement, uneven strides that hinted at a creature either fleeing or pursuing something. Thomas crouched, brushing aside a thin layer of snow to examine the prints more closely. The edges were sharp and clear, not melted or weathered, confirming their recent origin. His mind raced with questions. What kind of animal could leave such tracks? Was it a predator, or perhaps a survivor of the storm? The idea of a living creature out here, amid the desolation, sparked a cautious hope. The trail beckoned him forward, promising answers, or at least a sign of life amid the icy wasteland. His fingers instinctively reached into his coat pocket, gripping the worn talisman, a keepsake from a distant memory, a silent prayer for safety. He hesitated, weighing the risks of following the trail against the potential for discovery. Outside, the landscape remained silent, as if holding its breath. The footprints seemed to call him onward, whispering promises of revelation. A faint hope stirred. Perhaps this was a sign that something had survived the storm, something still alive and worth seeking. His gaze shifted back to the trail, then down to the icy surface of the lake. The footprints led toward the frozen water, a dark trail cutting across the white expanse. Cautiously, he moved a step forward, then another, each movement measured and deliberate. The snow beneath his boots crunched softly, the sound swallowed by the vast silence. As he advanced, the trail grew more distinct, revealing the uneven gait of the creature that had passed here. The lake's surface stretched out before him, a vast, mirror-like sheet of ice reflecting the bleak sky. Once a barrier against the storm, it now seemed fragile. The footprints approached the shoreline, then disappeared into a series of irregular marks that crisscrossed the ice. Thomas slowed, studying the pattern. The creature had paused here, perhaps sensing something or simply resting. Dragging marks faintly traced the snow, suggesting injury or fatigue. He stepped closer, eyes scanning the ice for movement beneath the surface. The crackling of shifting ice sounded ominous in the stillness. His thoughts churned. What kind of animal could leave such signs? Was it a predator or perhaps a wounded survivor? The questions pressed on him, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the trail ahead. The footprints continued toward the center of the lake, then veered toward a dark patch near the middle, an area where the snow had been disturbed, revealing a thin crack in the ice. He hesitated again, a flicker of caution flashing through him. The ice looked solid, but beneath, the water was dark and unfathomable. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his own uncertainty. Yet the faint hope persisted. Maybe this trail led to something alive, something that could shed light on the strange cold and shadows he had glimpsed earlier. He took a steadying breath, testing the ice with cautious steps. The surface was slick, uneven, with patches of cracked ice and snow muffling his movements. As he neared the center, the footprints scattered, as if the creature had paused or changed course. Near the dark patch, he noticed a small mound of disturbed snow, and beneath it, a glint, something shiny, partially buried beneath the ice. His heart quickened. Carefully, he knelt, reaching out with trembling hands. The cold bit into his fingertips as he brushed aside the snow, revealing a fragment of bone, or perhaps a piece of frozen flesh. The discovery confirmed his suspicions. Something had been injured here, possibly the creature itself. He looked around, scanning the icy expanse for signs of movement or life. The trail stretched further into the distance, leading deeper into the unknown. His mind raced. Was this a sign of an injured survivor nearby, or a warning of danger lurking beneath the surface? The footprints vanished near the center, but the disturbed snow and the fragment beneath the ice suggested recent activity. With a deep breath, Thomas made his decision. He would follow the trail, step by cautious step, driven by the hope of finding something alive or gaining answers about the strange cold that had invaded his world. Carefully, he stepped onto the ice, testing its strength with each movement. The surface was treacherous, slick patches, thin layers of snow muffling his steps, and the faint cracks that hinted at instability. As he moved toward the middle, the footprints became more sporadic, as if the creature had hesitated or changed direction. Near the dark patch, he spotted a small disturbance, an area where snow had been pushed aside, revealing a thin crack in the ice. His gaze fixed on it, heart pounding. Beneath the surface, the water was dark, silent, and unfathomable. He clenched his jaw, feeling the tension in his muscles. The fragment of bone or flesh beneath the ice confirmed injury. Perhaps the creature was wounded, struggling to survive. His eyes darted across the frozen landscape, searching for movement, for signs of life. The trail extended into the distance, beckoning him to follow further into the unknown. But this time, a new resolve took hold. He would not blindly chase shadows. Instead, he would look for signs of life beyond the ice, perhaps find a way to help or understand what lurked here. The landscape stretched before him, silent, vast, and full of secrets. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured, as he moved deeper into the icy wilderness, determined to uncover the truth. By the end of this journey, Thomas was no longer just a cautious observer. He had become an active seeker, armed with new knowledge. An injured creature was nearby, and the cold that haunted his world was more than just weather. It was a sign of something lurking beneath the surface, something alive or wounded, waiting for him to find it. The world had shifted, and so had he. No longer an outsider, but a participant in the unfolding mystery. Thomas stepped back abruptly as the ice beneath his feet emitted a sharp, unsettling groan. The faint shimmer of sunlight reflected jaggedly off the frozen surface, casting fractured patterns across the snow-covered ground. A metallic tang hung heavy in the air, cutting through the cold with an unnatural edge, carried on the biting wind that seemed to whisper warnings through the cracks and fissures of the fragile ice. His eyes darted across the surface, scanning for any signs of instability, every nerve taut with suspicion. He moved cautiously, each step deliberate, ears attuned to the subtle responses of the ice under his weight. The oppressive silence was punctuated only by distant, eerie creaks that vibrated through the frozen landscape, as if the very ground was alive and protesting. His gaze fixed on a dark smear, bloodstains splattered across the icy crust. The crimson spots contrasted starkly against the white, like wounds on a pallid, frozen flesh. His breath formed quick clouds, mingling with the frigid air as he lowered himself into a crouch, eyes narrowing to examine the trail. The blood was fresh, glistening in the pale sunlight, yet the pattern was inconsistent, sporadic drips leading outward as if spilled in haste. He reached out, fingertips brushing the icy crust, but the surface was unnervingly smooth, with no signs of melting or recent disturbance. The bloodstains suggested a sudden, violent injury, perhaps a struggle, but what or who it belonged to remained uncertain. A gust of wind intensified, carrying a sharp, metallic scent that sliced through the cold. It prickled at his skin, raising goosebumps along his arms. The distant groans of the ice grew louder, ominous, and unpredictable. Every crack and pop sounded like a warning, as if the entire frozen expanse was testing its limits. Thomas clenched his jaw, narrowing his eyes as he scanned the horizon, searching for movement or any sign of what might have caused the bloodshed. His gaze lingered on the faint trail of blood, which led toward a narrow fissure where the ice appeared thinner, darker, almost translucent in the sunlight. The crack seemed to beckon him, whispering of hidden depths beneath the surface. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and caution, he edged closer, each step measured, aware of the increasing instability beneath him. Suddenly, a sharp, echoing crack shattered the silence. The sound was unnervingly close, too close, and his body tensed instinctively. The fissure beneath his feet quivered, a thin line widening rapidly, exposing a jagged gap that threatened to swallow the trail. The ice groaned again, louder this time, protesting the intrusion. His heart hammered against his ribs as he watched the thin ice shimmer ominously near the widening crack. He retreated slowly, every muscle coiled, eyes flickering between the expanding fissure and the bloodstains leading toward it. The surface was perilously unstable, threatening to give way at any moment. Yet, an undeniable pull of curiosity urged him onward. The blood and the crack seemed linked, parts of a story desperately waiting to be unraveled. His hand hovered near his waist, hesitating over the small knife tucked into his coat pocket. Not that it would do much against the ice, but it offered a measure of reassurance, a reminder of his resolve. The wind howled louder, whipping snowflakes into his face, blurring his vision. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the snow from his eyes, then refocused on the fissure. A subtle shift caught his attention, an almost imperceptible ripple passing through the ice near the crack. His instincts screamed caution, yet he knew turning away now might mean missing a vital clue. The bloodstains, the fissure, the metallic scent. These signs pointed to something stirring beneath the surface, something that could explain the unnatural cold and the strange shadows he had glimpsed earlier. He took a deep breath, steadying himself against the biting wind, and stepped cautiously toward the edge of the fissure. The thin ice looked fragile, barely holding its form. With deliberate care, he leaned forward, peering into the darkness below. The opening was narrow but deep, and a faint, shifting glow emanated from within, hinting at movement, perhaps a creature or something else entirely. Suddenly, a loud crack shattered the tense silence, causing him to stumble back instinctively. The fissure widened abruptly, sending a cascade of shattered ice into the abyss. The sound echoed across the plain like a warning, an omen of the peril that lurked beneath. His pulse quickened as he watched the ice give way, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He stood at the edge, breathing heavily, eyes fixed on the yawning gap. The bloodstains, the crack, the faint glow, Each pointed to a presence beneath the surface, something alive and potentially dangerous. The uncertainty pressed heavily on him, yet he couldn't turn away. Something was stirring beneath the frozen veneer, leaving its mark in blood and fracture. As the last shards of ice settled, he realized this discovery would alter everything. The surface was only a prelude. Beneath lay a deeper enigma, waiting to be uncovered. The blood-stained ice and the widening fissure signaled that the unknown was drawing closer, something patient and unseen, ready to reveal its secrets from the depths below. His gaze lingered on the fractured ice, the faint glow beneath, and the bloodstains that seemed to pulse with an ominous rhythm. He knew the danger was imminent, but turning back was no longer an option. Whatever lurked beneath the ice had already begun to change him. His understanding, his resolve, his perception of the threat. The landscape's silence now felt heavier, charged with the promise of revelation and peril. He took a final, steadying breath, then stepped forward again, determined to face whatever lay beneath. The fissure's darkness beckoned, promising answers and danger. The icy surface, bloodstains, and the mysterious glow had woven a new chapter into his journey, one that would push him deeper into the unknown, where shadows and secrets waited patiently in the frozen depths. The station's interior was cloaked in oppressive silence, broken only by the distant, irregular groans of the ice shifting outside. Thomas sat tense in his chair, eyes fixed on the narrow slit of window glass that fractured the storm-tossed landscape beyond. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, wavering like phantom figures trying to pierce the darkness. His fingers curled tightly around the cold metal of his rifle, knuckles blanching as every nerve in his body thrummed with alertness. The wind's howl battered the walls with relentless fury, a piercing, shrill chorus that seemed to drown out all hope of normalcy. Outside, the blizzard raged anew, snow spiraling in violent, unpredictable gusts that blurred the horizon and reduced visibility to mere feet. The icy gusts rattled the thin metal shutters, their metallic shrieks threatening to give way, exposing whatever lurked in the storm's chaos. A shiver crept down Thomas's spine, not from the cold, which was persistent, but from a growing, primal sense that he was being watched. Unseen eyes, hidden in the swirling white, waited for the perfect moment to strike. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, peering into the darkness, eyes darting for any sign of movement. Shadows flickered again, faint, fleeting shapes that seemed to pulse at the edge of perception. He blinked rapidly, trying to dispel the illusion, but the sensation persisted, growing more insistent. His mind conjured images of figures slipping through the storm, slipping past the limits of light and sound, unseen but present. A faint scraping noise echoed in his ears, barely audible over the roar of the wind, yet it gnawed at his consciousness with unnatural persistence. The sound returned, softer this time, like claws dragging across the icy surface just beyond the station's perimeter. His grip on the rifle tightened involuntarily. He pressed his palm against the cold glass, narrowing his eyes, trying to focus. Every nerve was on edge, every instinct tuned to detect the slightest anomaly. The station was isolated, cut off from help, vulnerable in ways he had never fully appreciated until now. A shadow shifted swiftly at the corner of his vision. Thomas froze, heart pounding with a rhythm that felt both alien and familiar. The flickering silhouette seemed to ripple, almost like a mirage, yet the cold sweat on his brow betrayed the reality of his mounting fears. The storm outside obscured his line of sight, but his mind painted vivid images. A dark figure lurking behind snowdrifts, claws scraping, eyes watching, waiting. He hesitated only briefly before rising slowly from his seat. Every movement was deliberate, cautious. His boots made soft, muffled sounds on the wooden floor as he approached the door, rifle aimed and ready. The handle was cold and unyielding under his grip. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his trembling hands, and slowly turned the latch. The door swung open with a faint groan, revealing a narrow slit of swirling snow and darkness beyond. The icy blast hit him like a physical blow, piercing through his clothing and stinging his cheeks. He stepped outside, the snow immediately biting into his skin, numbing his face. His eyes swept the bleak landscape, searching for any sign of movement or threat. Shadows stretched and twisted under the storm's assault, but nothing concrete revealed itself, only the relentless white chaos. He moved cautiously, hugging the wall of the station, rifle at the ready. Every step was measured, as if walking on fragile glass. The wind carried an unsettling, faint metallic sound, like claws dragging across ice or something scraping along the snow. Distant but persistent. He strained his ears, trying to distinguish it from the storm's roar. The noise was rhythmic, almost like a deliberate clawing, or perhaps a creature dragging itself across the snow. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye again. This time, he saw it more clearly, an irregular shape darting between snowdrifts, just beyond the reach of his flashlight beam. His breath hitched, heart pounding louder. The silhouette paused, then vanished behind a thick mound of snow, leaving only an impression of hurried motion. A cold dread seeped into his bones. Was it an animal, or something more sinister? The storm's chaos masked many things, and the shifting shadows seemed alive, twisting with a mind of their own. His finger hesitated on the trigger, torn between instinct and doubt. The scraping sound returned, closer now, from behind the station, from the darkness pressing inward. He pressed his back against the cold wall, rifle raised, ears straining. Silence stretched painfully, broken only by the wind's shriek. Then, a deliberate step, closer. His eyes flicked toward the darkened corner of the building, searching for movement. The shadow flickered again, more distinctly this time. A crouched silhouette, waiting, patient. A flicker of suspicion flared within him. Was it a creature, a person, or some hallucination conjured by the storm's fury? His mind raced through possibilities, but his body remained tense, poised. Every nerve fiber urged him to act, yet caution held him back. Shadows were unpredictable, and the storm's chaos blurred the line between reality and illusion. He held his breath, listening intently, but only the storm's relentless howling responded. His eyes darted back and forth, searching for the faintest movement, the tiniest sign of life in the darkness. Minutes felt like hours, suspended in a tense, breathless stasis. Then, a sudden gust of wind tore through the station's porch, scattering loose debris and rattling the windows. The storm intensified, as if responding to his heightened tension. The flickering shadows seemed to ripple and elongate, then retreat into the swirling darkness. A cold breeze brushed his cheek, an almost imperceptible caress that sent a shiver through his spine. He lowered his rifle slightly, trying to steady his trembling hands. His senses were frayed, the storm's fury relentless, but he was certain of one thing. Whatever was out there was not just wind or snow. Something else lurked in the shadows, something waiting, watching, and perhaps preparing to strike when he was least expectant. He turned back toward the station, closing the door behind him with a muffled thud. As the lock clicked into place, he couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness outside was alive, an entity that watched and waited, ready to reveal itself once the storm's chaos subsided. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, silent reminders that the night's secrets had not yet been fully uncovered. But now his perspective had shifted. The storm's fury masked the true threat, and the shadows no longer seemed just figments of his imagination. Something had changed. He had glimpsed a presence, and that knowledge would linger, fueling his paranoia and resolve. The station's walls, once a refuge, now felt fragile, as if the storm and shadows conspired to pull him into their silent, unseen game. He knew he could not stay forever. The storm would eventually weaken, and with it, the illusions would fade. Until then, he would keep his vigil, waiting for the moment when the darkness would finally reveal its true face. His grip on the rifle tightened once more, and he prepared himself for whatever might emerge from the swirling white beyond the station shelter. Thomas stood motionless, eyes fixed on the distant flicker of light shimmering against the darkened horizon. The biting night air pressed in around him, silent but for the faint whisper of snow sliding over itself and the distant crackle of frozen branches strained by the wind. His breath formed ghostly clouds that vanished swiftly into the cold. Behind him, the weak glow of the abandoned station flickered intermittently, but his gaze remained unwavering on that faint spark, as if it held the key to salvation. The light flickered irregularly, like a heartbeat struggling to keep rhythm in the darkness. Sometimes it pulsed brighter, then dimmed, almost vanishing before reappearing in unpredictable bursts. It seemed insignificant, a tiny glow in the vast emptiness, but in this silence, it felt monumental. A beacon of hope amid despair, a possible sign that rescue was near. His fingers trembled as he reached inside his coat, clutching the worn fabric for steadiness. Cold seeped through his gloves, but it was the mixture of hope and doubt that made his hand shake more than the chill. He had no certainty that this light was real, only a desperate belief that it might be. Could it be a passing patrol? A signal from someone else stranded here? Or was it merely a trick of the mind? An hallucination born of exhaustion and isolation? He knew well how fragile hope was in these endless, silent hours, how easily it could dissolve into bitter disappointment. He pressed his gloved palm against the frost-covered window, peering out into the darkness. The flickering glow danced erratically, casting fleeting shadows over the snowdrifts. The wind sharpened, biting through his layers as he moved toward the door, each step deliberate, boots crunching softly on the icy crust. Every motion was measured, every breath a cloud that mingled with the piercing cold. The storm had subsided hours earlier, leaving behind a transformed landscape, cratered and ridged, with snowdrifts sculpted into strange, unnatural shapes by the relentless gales. Yet amid the chaos, this faint beacon persisted, unwavering. It called to him like a lighthouse guiding a stranded sailor through a storm, promising direction through the darkness and cold. He hesitated, hand hovering over the latch, eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the glow. Doubt gnawed at him. What if it was a mirage? A flicker caused by the reflection of broken ice or distant stars? Or worse, what if it was a trap, an illusion designed to lure him into danger? Cold fear seeped into his mind, whispering doubts that threatened to drown his resolve. But another voice, steadier and more determined, urged him forward. The possibility of rescue, of breaking free from this endless cycle of solitude, was too compelling to ignore. He remembered Elena's voice from earlier, warning him to stay inside, to wait. Yet waiting now felt like surrender. Every second spent hesitating edged him closer to despair. His hand moved instinctively to the pouch in his coat, fingers closing around the cold metal of the flare. Carefully, he uncapped it, feeling the ignition strip crumble slightly under his touch. The night stretched before him, silent, oppressive, yet filled with the faint hope of salvation. With a deep breath, he prepared himself, then pressed the trigger. A sharp crack split the silence as the flare ignited, shooting a blazing orange arc into the sky. Its glow burst outward, illuminating the snow with a fiery hue that seemed to set the world ablaze. For a moment, the darkness held its breath, the contrast of light and shadow more vivid than ever. Thomas watched as the smoke billowed upward, drifting lazily into the frigid air, casting long, flickering shadows across the frozen ground. He remained rooted, eyes fixed on the distant point of light. It flickered again, pulsing with renewed intensity. Hope surged within him, tempered by caution. Could this signal truly summon help? Or was it merely an illusion, a fleeting spark in the unyielding darkness? A gust of wind swept snow in spirals around him, swirling in chaotic patterns. The flare's smoke curled upward, blending into the night's shadows. His gaze remained steady, trying to interpret the glow's meaning. Was it stationary, or did it shift and flicker? Could he trust what he saw? Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second weighed down by tension. His fingers clenched tighter around the flare, knuckles blanching as he contemplated his next move. The cold seeped into his bones, yet a flicker of warmth ignited within, an ember of hope that refused to die. Suddenly, the distant light pulsed brighter, almost blinding in its brilliance. It seemed to beat rhythmically, like a heartbeat echoing through the silence. His chest tightened, a mixture of anticipation and dread flooding him. What if this was the moment? What if dawn would bring salvation, rescue, safety, relief? He took a cautious step forward, then another, each movement precise and measured. The terrain was treacherous, snow-crusted and slick with ice, but his focus sharpened. Every step brought him closer to that distant glow, into the unknown that might hold his salvation or his final disappointment. As he advanced, he cast a quick glance back toward the station's faint glow, a reminder of the world he was leaving behind. The flickering light beckoned him onward, promising hope amid the shadows. His grip on the flare tightened, ready to follow the signal into the darkness, into whatever lay beyond. The wind howled anew, swirling snow into chaotic spirals that danced around him. The flare's smoke curled upward, merging with the night's shadows. His eyes narrowed as he tried to decipher the meaning of the distant glow. Was it steady, or did it flicker and shift? Could he rely on it? A sudden, sharp gust knocked loose a flake of ice from a nearby tree, sending it tumbling into the snow. The sound broke his concentration, momentarily distracting him. He paused, listening, then resumed his cautious approach. The flickering light pulsed again, brighter this time, almost like a heartbeat echoing in the silence. His mind raced, weighing the possibilities. Was this truly a sign of help approaching, or merely another illusion? The cold pressed against him, but his resolve hardened. He realized that waiting passively was no longer an option. If he wanted to survive, he had to act. He took another step, then another, each one deliberate. The glow grew clearer, more defined, as if it responded to his movement. His heart pounded, partly from exertion, partly from the hope that this could be his salvation. The night stretched endlessly around him, but within, a new determination burned brighter. Finally, the distant light pulsed one last time, brighter than before, almost blinding. It seemed to sync with his heartbeat, a rhythmic call for aid. Thomas's chest tightened, a mixture of anticipation and fear. Was this the moment he had been waiting for? Or was it a cruel mirage, teasing him before vanishing into the darkness? He hesitated only briefly, then stepped forward with renewed purpose. Each movement was cautious but resolute. The icy ground threatened to slip beneath his boots, but he pressed on, driven by the hope that this flickering beacon would lead him to safety. As he moved into the shadows, he cast a final glance back at the station's faint glow. It was a reminder of the world he was leaving behind, a world of uncertainty and danger. Now, the only thing guiding him was the pulsating light, a fragile hope that refused to fade. The wind howled louder, whipping snow into frenzied spirals. Yet Thomas kept his eyes on the distant glow. His grip on the flare was firm, his mind focused on the promise it held. Whatever lay ahead, rescue or further peril, he was determined to follow this signal through the darkness, into the uncertain dawn that awaited beyond the horizon. The icy silence was shattered by a sudden, distant cracking that echoed through the frozen landscape, signaling an imminent collapse. Thomas, crouched near the window, stiffened as he watched the horizon. The snow and ice beneath the distant mountains shimmered with unnatural flickers, and dark fissures snaked across the surface, spreading rapidly. His heart tightened with foreboding. This was no ordinary thaw. Elena burst into the station, her face streaked with snow and wind, urgency etched into her features. She slammed the door shut behind her, her breath ragged. "Thomas, we need to move now," she said sharply, eyes darting toward the window. "The ice is cracking apart faster than we anticipated. If we stay, we'll be buried alive." He rose, instinctively scanning the room for supplies, his mind racing. What's causing this acceleration? The temperature hasn't dropped suddenly. His voice was strained, trying to grasp the sudden shift. She shook her head grimly. It's the warm front moving in faster than predicted. The meltwater beneath the ice is pooling and forcing the cracks open. The entire glacier is destabilizing. We saw the signs yesterday, the small crevices, the shifting snow, but I didn't expect it to escalate this quickly. Thomas moved to the door, hesitating as a low rumble vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. Outside, the landscape was transforming into a chaos of flowing slush and fractured ice. The horizon flickered with a sickly glow, the reflection of the melting surface and the distant thunder of calving icebergs. "We're running out of time," Elena pressed, voice low but urgent. "The station's foundation isn't designed to withstand this. The ground is already shifting beneath us. If we stay, we'll be swallowed." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his bones. "Is there any way to reinforce the structure? To buy us a few more minutes?" She grimaced. "The damage is beyond repair. The walls are cracking, and the ice around the station is fracturing. Reinforcements would be pointless. We need to evacuate before the whole thing collapses." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant, thunderous cracking and the faint roar of the melting glacier. Outside, the landscape was a swirling chaos of shifting whites and grays, the relentless advance of destruction unstoppable. Thomas's stomach clenched with dread, but he also felt a flicker of clarity. "Gather what you can," he said quietly, voice steady. "We leave in 10 minutes." Elena nodded sharply and headed toward the storage room. Thomas hurried after her, grabbing his coat and a few remaining supplies, an extra flashlight, dried food, a compact first aid kit. The cold seeped through the walls, a stark reminder that their refuge was no longer secure. As they prepared to depart, a deep, resonant tremor shook the station, causing the walls to shudder and the floor to creak ominously. Outside, the waterline had crept dangerously close, lapping at the base of the structure, threatening to breach their last line of safety. "Is there any way to signal for help?" Elena asked, voice hushed, eyes scanning the darkened room. Thomas shook his head. "No rádios, no satellite links. Everything's dead. We're completely isolated." She studied him, her gaze searching. "Then we must rely on our instincts. Find higher ground, avoid the weakest spots. The terrain's shifting faster than we can predict." He clenched his fists. "Follow me. We need to move now." They moved swiftly through the narrow corridors, the walls trembling with each tremor. The floor groaned beneath their steps. The ceiling above threatened to cave in. Every crack and creak was a warning. Outside, the melting landscape was a relentless, ever-changing battlefield. Reaching the entrance, Thomas threw open the heavy door. A blast of icy wind and spray hit them, carrying the scent of melting snow and rushing water. The scene beyond was a nightmare. Fractured ice, flowing slush, and the horizon ablaze with the unnatural glow of the thaw. "Look at that," Elena whispered, her voice trembling with urgency. "The ice is breaking apart faster than we thought. We've maybe minutes before the floodwaters reach the station." Thomas stared at the chaos, feeling a mixture of helplessness and resolve. "There's a ridge inland, higher ground. We need to get there before the water cuts us off." She nodded sharply. "Then that's our target." They navigated the treacherous terrain, slippery, uneven, alive with the sounds of cracking ice and rushing currents. Each step was a gamble, the ground shifting beneath their feet, ice slabs threatening to topple. The landscape was reshaping itself, transforming the familiar into a dangerous maze. Suddenly, a massive cracking noise erupted behind them. Thomas spun around, eyes wide as a giant sheet of ice broke free, crashing into the water with a deafening splash. The sound reverberated through the air, a stark reminder of the fragile stability of their environment. "Move!" Elena shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. They pushed on, the floodwaters now lapping at their heels, the current tugging at loose snow and ice. The horizon shimmered with the glow of melting ice, as if the entire world was dissolving into chaos. Reaching the base of the ridge, they scrambled upward, each step a struggle against the slick, unstable surface. When they finally reached a stable patch of higher ground, they paused to catch their breath, glancing back at the station and the crumbling landscape. The water had already begun to encroach upon the station's perimeter, swallowing the lower structures and creeping closer. The entire area was a shifting mass, a testament to nature's fury. The once solid foundation was now a jigsaw of fractured ice and flowing water. Elena turned to Thomas, her face tight with determination. "We're safe for now, but the station's gone. We need a plan fast." He looked at her, eyes dark with the weight of their situation. "We stay here, watch the water level. If it rises further, we'll need to find shelter elsewhere." She pulled her coat tighter, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the glow of melting ice flickered like a dying ember. The landscape continued to unravel, and with it, their fragile hope for rescue. The only certainty was that the chaos was far from over. In that moment, they both understood. The world they relied on had become unpredictable, dangerous, and unforgiving. The thaw was only the beginning of a new, relentless struggle against forces beyond their control. The glacier's collapse was imminent, and with it, the possibility that everything they knew might be lost forever. The water pressed steadily against the fragile base of the station, its rhythmic swell ominously deliberate as it rose higher. The howling wind tore through the icy air, carrying a piercing, mocking scream that drowned out the distant groan of shifting ice. Inside, tension thickened the air. Every breath was shallow and ragged as the building trembled under the relentless fury of nature's wrath. Thomas moved swiftly but cautiously, eyes fixed on the advancing waterline. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of the decision pressing on him. The floodwaters threatened to swallow everything, transforming the station into a drifting ruin. The windows rattled, shadows flickering erratically in the dim light, mimicking the chaos outside. He knew that their only hope depended on the plan Marcus and Sophia had crafted. Their arrival had ignited a flicker of optimism, yet every second wasted increased the peril. The escape route was perilous, a narrow, unstable corridor leading toward the ice ridge, a fragile bridge over the surging waters. Any misstep could send them plunging into the icy abyss. "Are you ready?" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos, tense but controlled. His face was grim, eyes scanning the flooded chamber for signs of structural failure. Sophia stood nearby, clutching a bundle of supplies, her gaze flickering between the water and the door. Thomas nodded sharply, swallowing hard. "We need to move now. The water's rising faster than we anticipated." Marcus stepped forward, unlocking the door with a swift motion. Beyond was a dim corridor, lit only by a flickering lantern whose weak glow struggled against the darkness. The stale air inside carried a damp scent of wood and cold metal. The narrow passage stretched ahead, a thin line between the rising flood and the unknown depths beyond. He took the first step, then paused, glancing back at Thomas. "Stay close. No sleeping." Thomas followed, each step deliberate and cautious. The floor beneath was slick, ice crystals shimmering faintly. The distant roar of the water grew louder, echoing through the tunnel like a predator stalking its prey. Every sound was magnified. The drip of melting ice, the creak of the station's walls, their own labored breathing. Sophia moved close behind, her grip tight on the supplies. Her eyes darted around, searching for signs of structural weakness. The corridor swayed with each gust of wind, making balance precarious. The silence was broken only by the faint cracking of ice overhead, as if the entire landscape was holding its breath. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed through the tunnel. Marcus froze, his face tightening. The ceiling above was sagging, ice and snow bowing ominously, threatening to collapse at any moment. Without hesitation, he signaled everyone to quicken their pace. "Watch for the weak spots," he whispered urgently. "We can't stay here." Thomas felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Every movement had to be precise. One slip could be fatal. As they pressed forward, a section of the ceiling gave way with a deafening crash, showering frost and debris. The others flinched, but Marcus kept moving, voice steady. "Keep going. No hosetaschen." The corridor narrowed further, forcing them into a crawling crawl over a fragile patch of ice that looked ready to fracture beneath their weight. Sophia shivered, clutching the supplies tighter as she navigated the treacherous terrain. Outside, the wind's howling intensified, a relentless shriek warning of the storm's fury. Ahead, the faint outline of the ice ridge appeared, an uncertain, shimmering barrier against the dark sky. It was their only refuge, a narrow strip of solid ground above the rising flood. But the last stretch was the most dangerous. The ice was fractured, jagged cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. "Almost there," Thomas whispered, voice strained. Marcus reached the edge first, crawling onto the icy crest and then extending a hand. "Come on, we can do this." Sophia hesitated, glancing back at the turbulent waters threatening to swallow everything. Her fingers brushed Marcus's hand, and she was pulled onto the ridge just as a loud cracking sound echoed behind them. The section of ice they just crossed groaned ominously, a warning of imminent collapse. "Run!" Marcus shouted, urgency sharpening his tone. They scrambled forward, wind tearing at their clothes, snow stinging their faces. The floodwaters surged beneath the thin ice, threatening to break through at any moment. Their steps faltered on the uneven surface, each one risking disaster. Yet they pressed on, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The ridge trembled beneath their weight, snow and ice shifting with every gust. The storm's fury seemed to converge at that moment, a tempest of wind and water testing their resolve. Sophia's breath caught as a loud crack split the air, and she saw the edge of the ridge ripple dangerously. "Almost there," Thomas shouted, voice barely audible over the chaos. Suddenly, a section of the ice beneath Marcus splintered, cracking open with a thunderous roar. His face registered alarm as he lunged forward, desperately trying to regain balance. The ground beneath him gave way, and he plunged into the icy depths with a splash. "No!" Sophia screamed, instinctively reaching out. Thomas lunged, grabbing Marcus's arm with all his strength. The man's fingers slipped, ice cold and trembling. For a heart-stopping moment, they hung there, suspended between survival and catastrophe. Then, with a strained effort, Thomas yanked Marcus onto the ridge, pulling him back from the brink. They collapsed onto the icy surface, gasping for air, hearts pounding. The storm raged around them, but the immediate danger had been averted. The floodwaters, though still threatening, had been held at bay for now. Sophia pressed her hand to her chest, trembling. "Is everyone okay?" Marcus coughed, voice hoarse. "Just barely, but we're alive." Thomas looked back at the collapsing ice behind them, then at the treacherous, shimmering expanse ahead. The narrow escape had bought them a fragile moment of respite, yet the environment remained hostile. The station's foundation trembled again, and the wind's final, chilling note warned of impending disaster. They exchanged exhausted glances, realizing that their survival depended on their next move. The storm still roared, the water still threatened, and the fragile ice beneath their feet was only temporarily holding. Their situation had changed. They had escaped the flooded corridor, but now they faced the peril of the unstable ice ridge and the ongoing chaos. A new understanding settled among them. They could no longer rely solely on the plan. The storm's fury and the collapsing ice had revealed that their situation was more precarious than they had thought. Their knowledge of the environment's instability was now confirmed, and their previous hope of a straightforward escape had been replaced by a recognition of the ongoing threat. As they caught their breath, Sophia's gaze hardened. She realized that their survival depended not just on reaching the ice ridge, but on finding a safer, more stable route. Perhaps by improvising a new path or using the debris to reinforce their footing. Marcus, still shaken, nodded slowly, understanding that their immediate goal was to reach higher ground and reassess their options. The storm's howling persisted, but now they knew that their next step must be more strategic. The narrow ridge was only a temporary refuge. The real challenge lay ahead, finding a way to escape the chaos fully, to reach safety beyond the storm's reach. In that moment, their perspective shifted. The danger was no longer just the rising water or collapsing ice, but the unpredictability of the environment itself. They had learned that survival meant adapting quickly, trusting each other, and seizing every fleeting opportunity. Their bond strengthened by the ordeal, they prepared to move again, knowing that the true test was still ahead. The storm raged on, but they carried with them a renewed resolve, one born from the realization that their situation had changed irrevocably, and only by acting decisively could they hope to survive. The first light of dawn filtered through the fractured glass, casting jagged streaks of pale gold across the debris-strewn floor. Outside, the landscape had been irrevocably reshaped by the storm's fury. Once endless expanses of icy wilderness stretched unbroken, but now fractured ice floes drifted aimlessly on dark, churning waters. The storm had spent itself overnight, leaving behind a fragile mosaic of melting ice and shifting currents that threatened to reshape the environment anew. Thomas moved cautiously, his boots crunching softly on the uneven surface of wreckage and snow. His eyes swept the horizon, alert for any sign of movement or life amid the chaos. The air was thick with a damp, cold mist, tinged with the faint scent of salt water seeping through the cracks in the debris. Every breath produced a cloud of condensation that lingered before dissolving into the biting wind. His heart beat steadily, a quiet mixture of relief and fatigue. Relief that the storm was finally over, exhaustion from days of relentless struggle. He approached the remains of the station's doorway, now just a jagged outline against the bleak sky. Scattered around were twisted metal, shattered glass, torn insulation, testaments to the storm's destructive power. As he paused, a faint movement caught his eye. A small, trembling shape pushed through the wreckage, struggling to move. It was the injured pup, limping feebly on a swollen paw stained with dried blood. Its fur was matted, dirt and ice crusted on its trembling frame. The creature's eyes fluttered open as Thomas knelt beside it, cautious but gentle. His hands brushed aside snow and debris, revealing a tiny face filled with vulnerability and pain. The pup's shallow breathing betrayed its fragile state, yet a flicker of recognition shone in its bright eyes. Thomas hesitated, then reached out slowly, mindful not to startle the fragile creature. Carefully, he lifted the pup into his arms. It whimpered softly, nestling into his chest. The cold was relentless, but warmth radiated from the small body pressed against him, a fragile spark of life. His mind raced. How long had it been out here? Had it survived the storm? Was there any other life left in this broken world? A sudden gust of wind rattled loose panels and stirred a swirl of snow, forcing Thomas to tighten his grip, shielding the pup from the biting cold. He glanced upward, noting how the rising sun struggled to pierce the thick cloud cover. For a moment, hope flickered, a fragile ember amid the icy desolation. He stood slowly, eyes fixed on the distant water where the ice was melting rapidly. The landscape was transforming before his eyes, becoming more unstable with each passing minute. The fractured ice floes shifted and collided, producing a cacophony of cracking sounds that echoed across the frozen expanse. Beneath the thin veneer of melting ice, hidden currents churned, threatening to swallow the remaining patches of land and ice. The realization struck him sharply. Everything he had fought to preserve was gone. The station, supplies, safety, all reduced to wreckage. Only memories lingered, faint echoes of a world that once seemed secure. Yet, amid the debris and chaos, one thing remained certain: the small, injured creature in his arms. His gaze shifted from the water's restless surface to the shelter he could find among the wreckage. The landscape was too unstable to travel far, but he needed to find a safe spot to tend to the pup. Moving carefully, he approached a partially collapsed section of the outer wall, which offered enough cover from the worst of the wind. He gently laid the pup on a patch of flattened snow, then rummaged through his coat pockets, retrieving bits of cloth and a small piece of dried meat from his rations. He tore a strip of cloth and wrapped it around the pup's injured paw, the animal whimpering softly but remaining still. Its bright eyes fluttered closed briefly, seeking comfort in the warmth. Thomas's jaw clenched, a mixture of guilt and resolve tightening his features. He had no medical kit, no antiseptic, only instinct and hope guiding his actions. He settled beside the creature, leaning against the cold wall, eyes fixed on the water's restless surface. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant cracking of ice and the occasional gust of wind. The storm had passed, but the aftermath lingered, an environment on the brink of further upheaval. Time seemed suspended, each minute stretching into an eternity of quiet despair and faint possibility. Thomas's thoughts drifted, contemplating how fragile survival was in this frozen wasteland, how easily everything could be lost. Yet, as he watched the pup's chest rise and fall, a small spark of determination ignited within him. Suddenly, the pup's eyes fluttered open again, meeting his gaze with a silent plea. Thomas reached out and gently stroked the tiny head. The creature's tail twitched, a faint sign of life amid the wreckage. The horizon was tinged with the soft pink glow of sunrise, illuminating the fractured ice and water in a muted, fragile light. A new day had begun, delicate, uncertain, yet filled with unspoken promise. The storm had passed, leaving a landscape transformed, vulnerable, unpredictable, but still alive. Thomas took a deep breath, the icy air filling his lungs. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with peril, each step uncertain. But in that moment, a renewed sense of purpose settled over him. The fragile life in his arms was a reminder that even in the harshest, most desolate corners of the world, hope could persist. He shifted slightly, preparing to move. Every step would be deliberate, every decision weighed carefully. Beyond this icy wilderness, what awaited was unknown, perhaps salvation, or perhaps further hardship. But for now, he would protect this vulnerable creature, nurture the faint flicker of life, and face whatever challenges lay ahead with quiet resolve.